Picture this. You just spent the last year and a half of your life trying to write a novel about your real world experiences with mental health while also integrating elements of sci fi and fantasy. It's about an evil entity that hops from universe to universe, creating chaos and destruction with the ultimate goal of corrupting the mind of a superpowered child until at the end, during a battle with a white haired woman, the entity is destroyed by said child. And so, after staying up all night perfecting the final script, finally, your magnum opus, your magnum dong, it's completed. Then, literally the next morning, you get up, meet with your brother, and watch a movie about, what do you know, an evil entity that hopped from universe to universe, creating chaos and destruction with the ultimate goal of corrupting the mind of a superpowered child, and in the end, during a battle with a white haired woman, said entity is destroyed by said powerful child. Yeah, not the greatest feeling in the world, but, what exactly happened here? Well, on my channel, I made a series of audiobooks called Dreamer's Odyssey, and they don't really get a whole lot of views. Now, I'm really proud of Dreamer's Odyssey. In fact, it recently spun off into its own animated series, and I have a lot of new announcements for it in the future, but I don't really want to talk about that. I actually don't really like talking about it in these types of videos at all, just because I don't want to, like, force my audience to want to watch it or listen to it. But, hey, if you're curious, I'll leave some links in the description. Just saying. Now, the thing that I quote-unquote plagiarized was an animated film from 1981 called Hefty Minerals. Now, for those who are unaware, heavy metal is the precursor to what would soon become Netflix's series Love, Death, and Robots, which I have not seen. Also, it was like based on a comic or something. I don't know, literally freaking everything's based on a comic. Now, I know I keep saying that I plagiarized it, but really I shouldn't be saying that, because, I mean, for one thing, that's, like, not really a thing you should say that you did, but also because I just actually didn't plagiarize it. I'm mostly just saying that for the joke and to provide context. If there ever was anything that I pulled inspiration from for Dreamer's Odyssey, I would have credited it. I think there's even an episode where I break the fourth wall literally just so I can explain my inspiration. Um, yeah. And I do think Dreamer's Odyssey is better than heavy metal, and that's not just like because of bias, but I do really just think it is. But I don't want to make this whole video just one big, oh, my OC is so much better than your OC. But I'm not going to do any of that. I'm going to sit down and analyze and review heavy metal the same I would anything else. Now, heavy metal actually has a bit of a stacked soundtrack. Like, look at this. Black Sabbath, Blue Oyster Cult, Journey. They got like a bunch of stuff in there. So, heavy metal, it's an anthology. It's made up of all these different short stories where things happen, and they're all tied together by this evil green orb. I know it has a name, I'm just gonna call it the evil green orb. So the movie begins with the Elon Musk car and space thing, and I'm not even joking. That's like actually how the movie freaking begins, with like an astronaut driving down from space. And honestly, the way it all is kind of shown and combined with the music going on, it's a pretty epic opening. I have to give it that. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it's pretty epic. Then the astronaut meets with this little girl, and literally before we can find out anything about either of them, like who they are, what their relationship with each other is, almost immediately the astronaut gets murdered by the evil green orb. Then the evil green orb is like, "Aight, kiddo, pull up a chair. I'ma tell you a really long story, and by the end of it, you're gonna be evil just like me." Something pretty cool about heavy metal is that even though it's an anthology, it still has continuity. You'll see later on that one of the things that happens in one of the stories actually ties into this big reveal that relates to the main plot later on. And I forgot to mention this earlier, but that is yet another thing that I did in Dreamer's Odyssey, but unexpectedly apparently also happened here. So Mr. Evil Green Orb here is kind of like the driving force behind everything. He creates the conflict of every story, except also not really. If the evil green orb were more like the wishing skull from Billy and Mandy, I feel like the movie would have been a lot more consistent. Like, allow me to explain. So this nerdy kid basically finds the evil green orb, and it casts some weird spell on him, and he turns into Dwayne the Rock Johnson. And he goes to this He-Man style world where he fights all kinds of monsters and saves the girl and does the sex even though he has the mind of a 17-year-old boy. The segment literally ends with Dwayne The Rock Johnson and his naked British love interest flying off into the sunset. And all I can really think when seeing this ending is just, why didn't the evil green orb do anything evil? Like, what if, imagine if the story was like, there's the nerdy kid who really wants to be He-Man, and then the orb turns him into He-Man, but then there's, unexpected consequences. There's, a subversion or a plot twist. Like, anything, right? Imagine if after the nerdy kid became He-Man, he saw people die horrible, gruesome deaths and realized how awful it is to be an action hero, and then maybe then he wants to go home and be normal again, but he can't, and so it ends on some cliffhanger ending where he's being dragged away to the dungeon. And I feel without that change, without that, like, element of, without the orb turning his fantasy into his worst nightmare, then it's just, a nerdy kid kills a bunch of people and has a bunch of sex, and it's like, really, what's the point to any of it? Now, I have to give it credit. There's one scene that I think is really funny where the queen and this other bad guy, I don't remember, are like fighting over the evil green orb. And it's like portrayed as just very awkward. And it's like so out of place, it's hilarious. And I'm certain this was like an intentional joke, but there aren't any other moments like that. And like, I mean, sure, it's not like horror, but it's still a subversion. You're not really expecting to see like an awkward scuffle in like a fantasy Lord of the Rings style story. And if there were just more stuff like that, it would have made a lot more sense. Another story shows us some World War II pilots fighting off a horde of zombies. And this one, sure, it's cool and all, but there's really no rhyme or reason to any of it. With this one, I just really struggled to care about the characters. Maybe if the reason why the zombies came to life was because their comrades or whatever were having trouble coping with their deaths, and maybe the whole theme of this one could be about accepting the inevitability of death, so that way it just feels like there's an actual point to all of it, but there isn't, so it's just a bunch of guys getting killed by zombies. So another story introduces this like really douchey Stan Smith American Dad looking guy, and he's being put on trial for like a bunch of different crimes. And so he bribes this other guy named Hanover Fist to like say a bunch of good stuff about him in court so he could walk free. So Hanover Fist finds the evil green orb, and it turns him into this big buff monster because apparently this orb really likes turning people really buff, and then he chases down Stan Smith. Except Stan Smith actually ends up killing Hanover Fist and escaping without getting any form of comeuppance. So, again, I ask, what was the point of any of that? Clearly, this wasn't meant to be a story about revenge, because Hanover Fist doesn't even succeed. It's not like he gets a bloodlust or anything after defeating Stan Smith and he goes to go kill a bunch more criminals and then takes it too far. No, it just stops. And again, sorry to keep bringing up the theme of each segment, but I feel like theme is an important thing. I'm going to come back to that later. So there was also a detective one. I don't really have a whole lot to say about that one. It's just kind of a generic detective story, only it's set in space, which is cool. I mean, yeah, that's cool, but still, it is pretty generic. So this one is different from a lot of the others where the evil green orb, technically, yes, it is the driving force of the plot, but not really by choice. It doesn't make people do anything. It doesn't, like, transform anyone or do anything like that, like how it does in all the others. Instead, it's just a bunch of gangsters fighting over it with each other. I just find it kind of odd that the literal main antagonist is treated as a prop just to be thrown around by other characters. I don't know. It's weird. Alright, so moving on to the next story. So in this one, right at the beginning, we're told that there's some weird stuff going on in space and astronauts are coming back down mutated. This plotline will never be brought up ever again. So there's this guy who works for the Pentagon, except he actually doesn't, because he's a robot sent down by some aliens to cover up the whole astronaut mutation thing, which I don't really know why, because that would mean that the aliens have some connection to the mutations going on, but it's never really explained or addressed. I don't know. Then the robot notices that his secretary is wearing the evil green orb, and then somehow the orb makes the robot really, like, horny, I guess, and then he tries to, like, I don't know, I don't want to explain that part. Then the secretary and the robot get taken by the aliens and they go off into space, and the secretary is pretty chill with all of this, actually. So there's this mouse robot thing, and I'm not gonna lie, he was actually pretty funny. So the secretary and the robot mouse thing do the do, however way they do that. Then the aliens get high, then they arrive at a spaceport, and then it just ends there, abruptly. In the detective story, the evil green orb was less a villain and more just a prop for all the characters to steal from each other. But here it's worse, really, since it moves the plot forward once and then just becomes an afterthought. Like, it's after the secretary is abducted, it like falls somewhere and then it's never brought up again. We don't even see how it like leaves this story. And there's really no conclusion or even conflict to this whole story. The final story introduces Tarna, who's the last survivor of a race of warrior people. So the evil green orb turned a bunch of dudes into, like, mutants now, and now it's sending them to go kill a bunch of people. And so after a long and grueling battle, eventually Tarna sacrifices herself to defeat the evil green orb. Something kind of weird is that the story ends with the evil green orb being destroyed, but when cut back to the present, we see it also being destroyed. So is it like, oh no, I forgot this story ends with me dying. I shouldn't have told it. Now I'm dying again. But I think the more likely explanation is that it didn't die in the first one, but it's just actually dying now. Then it's revealed that the whole reason why the evil green orb wanted the little girl is because she's actually the same species as Tarna, so she's destined to also be this like powerful warrior or whatever, which I don't know, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but I still like the fact that one of the stories actually does tie into the main plot. They're actually just the fact that there is a twist is what I like. I kind of wish that they leaned into that a bit more. The whole premise of an overarching anthology is like an untouched market. And I think actually there was like a scrapped segment that would have more intertwined the Stan Smith Hanover Fist story with the zombie World War II story. I think maybe, I don't know. But yeah, I think they should have leaned into that a bit more. I think my favorite part about heavy metal would have to be the animation. Each individual story has its own unique and distinct style, and that's something that I just really have to appreciate, credit where credit is due. Also, a lot of the stories would like mix sci-fi with elements of dark fantasy, and like that's something that I was planning on doing in later installments of Dreamer's Odyssey, but even things that I haven't written yet, this movie did first. How are you in my head? Get out of my head, man. Get out of my head. But I'd have to say that overall, there are two main issues with heavy metal: the structure and the characters. Now, as I've been saying, I feel like most of what happens in heavy metal doesn't really have a point to it. Like, the evil green orb claims to be the sum of all evils, but we're never really shown what the sum of all evils really means. Like, it doesn't really do anything a whole lot of the time. And that's why I think it should have gone the monkey paw route. Perhaps have each story be like symbolism for greed or lust or rage or whatever, and the evil green orb would like amplify those emotions in people, make them, grant their wishes, have them live out their wildest fantasies and see how awful the human brain can become or whatever. Alright, let's get the elephant Mario out the room already. Most of the characters in this movie, especially a lot of the women, are like are really horny, okay? That every segment almost always ends with a sex scene. There's so much sex in this movie. It just gets so repetitive over and over again, the same thing all the time, always. And I'm not gonna sit here and argue that you're not allowed to have mature topics in your movie or whatever. You can have it all you want. But what you can't have, or I guess maybe more shouldn't have, is paper thin characters and plot lines flimsier than pre engine flight machines. Recently, there's been a bit of a controversy because Tarna's outfit was redesigned to be less revealing. Now, I don't really care a whole lot either way, but I feel like heavy metal, the whole point of it is that it's meant to be all edgy and dark and whatever. So it does kind of make sense for her to have the other outfit, but at the same time, it's like after watching this movie, I feel like the outfit isn't really the problem. It's just the way the characters are written. Tarna isn't really as one dimensional as a lot of the other female characters in heavy metal, but there's still just a lot of really weird, long scenes of her, especially this one torture scene where they literally show you everything. Don't worry, by the way, this movie's rated R. And I want to specify that it's not just the female characters that suffer this whole issue. I feel like the males, a lot of them are have the same kind of problems as well. And yeah, I do like the whole dark fantasy sci-fi thing. If you want to take a more mature, darker route with that premise and have a lot of like, sex and death, then that's fine, but like just don't do it like this. Now, there is a sequel called Heavy Metal 2000, and I've heard that this one has like more like actual lore in it, more of the like story is in this one. And from what I've seen of it, it looks very like I almost want to say Planet Hulk kind of, but from what I can tell, this one doesn't have the whole anthology element, which could be good, could be bad, I don't know. Maybe it's better, maybe it's worse. I really don't know. I haven't seen it. Now, to close out this video, I'll touch on the accidental quote unquote plagiarism thing one last time. Obviously, I did not plagiarize it, didn't really intend to, but I think this does teach us a bit of a lesson. That sometimes, even when something is completely original, there could be something else somewhere out there that is exactly like it. In other words, originality is dead. No. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Don't let the existence of other things out there discourage you from creating what you want to create. Just as long as you don't make it all weird and stuff like how heavy metal did. So, yeah. Now, this should go without saying, but no, discovering heavy metal did not discourage me from finishing my own series. I'm still very dedicated to completing it, and if things go right, which they probably won't, by the end of next month, or maybe this month, depending on when this video comes out, you might be getting a music video based on Dreamer's Odyssey, so look out for that. But until then, this has been Bradwurst. Damn it. Man, this was such a freaking cool comic book when it came out. I mean, who'd have thought Stan Lee and Frank Miller really collabed to create this masterpiece? But then there was that really weird, dark, gritty live action remake, and God, I really did not care for that one.